So, welcome to HAH British Cars, and we're working on the TR2 again today, and we're going to work on the front hubs. So we're going to change the bearings out and get them back together, and I'm not sure whether we'll get the brakes on today, but that's where we're headed. So this is a TR2 hub, drum brakes. You can see it's very different than the disc brake hubs, though it does take the same set of bearings. I did check that. Now, I'm surprised to see that the front studs are swedged in, just like the rears are, whereas on the disc brake hubs, they're just pushed through and the shoulder has splines. So, I'm kind of undecided. I'm probably just going to cut these down for the wire wheels. That's certainly what the factory manual says to do, but we'll see. Anyway, so I pulled the grease seal out of this, and you can see the bearings are out, and I cleaned it up. And I've pushed this race out, so you can see in the pocket here, it has two notches, so you can get behind it with a punch. This punch and knock it out. So the same is true on the other side, though it's kind of hard to see. I'm doing this on the anvil portion of my vise, which you don't necessarily have to do that, but it does need to be a good firm surface. So the notches in the lower race should line up with the ones in the upper. Yeah, there's one right there. I should just be able to drive it down. I just want to work it down. I can only do obviously one side at a time because I only have two hands. So you can feel it move when you hit it. Just do a couple of strikes on each side and work it down. So that just hit the vise. So was that one. You can see now we're flush with the edge of the hub. And just toss it in the vise right here. This thing should have very little resistance now. There it is. So there's the old race. I admit that these things are 68 years old. And you can see it on this one, but here on the front one. Made in England, Timken bearings, and they're still, I mean, you can see they're worn. It's starting to gray just a little bit in there, but there's no chips. They're actually in pretty good condition. You can probably still reuse these, particularly when you figure, we're never going to put a lot of miles in this car at this point. But that's those out. Also, to clean the old grease out of here, so I expect that there's some of the original factory grease probably. I'm sure other people have put additional grease in here because it's not. So here's the bearing in the race, and we're going to need to repack these, or pack them, initial pack. So that goes into the nose. And usually the easiest thing is to find a socket that will just, here's an nth and H one. And you can tell when it gets home, it changes the pitch of the sound. Really feel it bouncing, and that's in. So there we go. That's driven in all the way, and I can feel with my finger that it's tight. You might be able to see there. So I'm going to go drive the other one in, and then we'll get back. So the old school kind of grease guy, old school greasing. So you put a wad of wheel bearing grease in your hand or your glove, and I'm going this with the big end of the bearing, and you just nip it into the corner. Just keep working around, and as you go, it takes a couple of minutes. But as you go around, you'll start to see the grease pushing out of the roller bearings, and that means that the space between the race and the cage is filled with grease, and that will lubricate the bearings. So I got to do this bearing and of course the small one. I'm not sure they gave me enough grease, but that's okay. So here are the new bearing seals. So you can see it's a piece of felt inside of a steel container. And these are supposed to be oil soaked, so you can just put these in a bit of oil overnight if you want, probably the easiest thing. I'm just going to use my oil can and work some oil into it, and after I got it good and soaked, I'm going to take a little bit of wheel bearing grease and put that over too, and then it goes in the hub that way, felt facing out, because it seals against the vertical link in the car. So this is the right front backing plate. Long bolts go up. The brake line that joins the two slave cylinders is on the downside. Feeds from the upper right. Here's the inside. So where you push the shoes clockwise. And there's lock tabs here as well. So I purchased some copper nickel lines from these, the whole kit, which seems pretty complete. So this is one of the jumper lines. They're all marked with these yellow tags that have identifying numbers on them and a little index on the box so you know which is which. And I've started bending this one up, but as you can see, it's about 1 inch too long, which is what I kind of figured when I looked at it. But I have a double flaring tool, so I should be able just to trim that down and put it in. And I've been using these pipe bender pliers. I bought them at Harbor Freight a while ago. They were not particularly expensive. I don't remember exactly, probably somewhere around $10. But they work really well for doing these tight curves. I don't know if you ever tried to do these, that most of the pipe benders you buy are more like this, with a much larger radius, which is great for lines along the frame and everything. But when you get into these tight quarters, these things are really nice. So anyway, I'm going to trim that in. So this is the double flaring tool. So you place the pipe in, you bring the top of the pipe level with that shoulder, and then when you put this pipe in, you want to snug down the clamp closest to the pipe, leaving the other end open about 1/4 inch, and then when this one's tight, tighten that one, and that way you have a lot more leverage clamping down. Otherwise, when you try to do this, it'll probably just push through. So here's the right die, and it goes in pin first. This is the piece that's going to do the flaring. So that goes over the end, and you center the cone on the dimple in the die. Put the handle through, and then you tighten. And so this is a two-step process. So you're going to feel when this one right there, that's pushed that down flush. We take this back off, and then we put it back on at the point into the hole. Tighten that back up. and we press again. And this is going to invert that flare. So you don't want to push too hard, otherwise you're just going to be flattening the bronze out. The cupra nickel. And there's the flared end. You also want to make sure your fitting's on before you start all that, otherwise you're going to have to cut it back off. And then undo the faraway clamp first, the near clamp, and that set up so it just rotates out of the way. And there you go. And then of course I couldn't put this last bend in, otherwise there wouldn't have been enough room to have this out of the way and fit the clamp on. So it's kind of a pain not being able to preform the whole thing first, but that's how it goes. So get this lined up. It looks like about where I want to be. And then, put this on backwards. Goes that way. So you want to roll it into the bend. That looks pretty good right there. And we'll see if they fit. Looks like I might be a little long. That's touching right there. It's clear on this one. Which probably means I left this a bit too long. That's a pity. Well, I'll have to go cut a tiny bit off of this end. I'll have to straighten that up again a bit so I can get the fitting back up, and then flare the end again. There we go. Fits in this just nice. Had to cut about an extra ½ an inch off, so these pipes were about 1.5 inches too long. The narrower bolt pattern goes up, this goes down, and I'm not sure which one of these feeds, but one feeds and it pushes the air through, and then that bleeds. So it probably actually, this is that side of the car. I don't remember where the front is from the front of the rear, but that's easy enough to change when we get it back to the car. So that's in. And now we need to clean up more parts. This is double checking, and these were rotated 90 degrees wrong. So those want to be vertical if this was in place, and that's because these adjusters fit into them. This is why it's really handy to leave one side together, so you always have a reference to go back and look at. So here's the shoes all set up. The springs go on the back. There's the springs coming up and through. The notches go for the adjusters, so you can see the brakes are 180 degrees opposite each other rather than being paired, rather than being mirrored. And then we just have to stretch them on over onto here. And here they are snapped in place. So you want to make sure that the spring goes to the hole that's more towards the center on both sides, otherwise there won't be any tension. You can see that these adjusters have come down into their notches. I also set the adjusters on the loosest setting to get them in, or at least close. These adjust by turning like that. So you can see that pushes the shoe out, lets the shoe come back in. So I think we're ready to go ahead and install these back on the car. Well, there it is, back on the car. I have to admit, it would have been easier to stretch these brake shoes on with it mounted, because otherwise it's just flopping around on the workbench, and that would have been easy enough to have mounted this first. So probably do that on the other side. I still need to put this little cover plate back in, but it's just 4 bolts. And I need to get the steering arm off the rest of this front suspension pieces, so I can I need to clean it up and paint it. So I haven't put these together yet just because I haven't done that. And then of course we'll put the hub back on. I showed you pushing the bearings in earlier, and that's just, you know, put it on. One of the things you want to make sure is that you snug it down tight, because you need to compress that felt washer and then set it as per the factory spec. And then of course the new brake drum. Well, that's it for today's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I don't know what the next thing I'm going to do after this is. I'll have to think about it. I do need to go through and start fitting brake line, all the cables for the emergency brake. So I'll probably do that next. We'll see you then.